Thank you all for coming back from this slightly shorter lunch break than it was envisaged. We will try to stick to the time which is given to us. Maybe even we will be a bit shorter in order to make a five-minute break between the two last panel discussions this afternoon. As you see, we have a big panel with two speakers and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 commentators or discutants, as we say. I would give to the two panelists between 10 to 15 minutes, it depends how much you would like to use. And then I would ask the other distinguished guests to contribute with some comments up to 5 minutes. It's a very challenging topic. Actually, there are many topics within this title, Reinventing the European Project. And there are some big questions: what Europe, what Southeastern Europe, and what democracy. There were so many things already said during these 2 days. Luckily, we had a kind of summary by Reinventing this morning, so we can, as maybe not all of us had the opportunity to follow the last days, yesterday's discussions, to get a sense on what were the main conclusions. We had very interesting contributions this morning. The region was mentioned many times. The European Union was mentioned in different ways. The EU integration process of the region was mentioned in many ways. The word democracy was mentioned in many different ways. So let's try to give a kind of new perspective on discussing these issues, try to combine all these terms, all these big questions, and let's try to come up with some conclusions, or maybe just try to formulate some very important questions which will make us all think further about these issues. I will give just a short introduction how I see this panel or these topics, having in mind that actually I suggested it to the organizers, as I was convinced that such a conference with so important participants at this very special place should deal with so challenging issues. And there are a few questions which I think would be very interesting to go deeper in. For example, what is the region? We are mentioning the region. So what is the region? Is it Southeastern Europe? If it's Southeastern Europe, how we define Southeastern Europe? There is a Southeastern Europe today, which is actually the two-tier Southeastern Europe. There are countries which are members of the EU. There are other countries which are not members of the EU. Recently there was the Western Balkans, which was the term for the countries which are aspiring to membership, but since 2013 Croatia is member of the EU, so it's not anymore the Western Balkans, as we sometimes say, maybe it's the Eastern Balkans. So the rest, which is there out of Croatia. Then what is the situation in these countries which are there? The rest, which are not yet in the EU, if we say that the EU integration process is the main driving force in the region, for those who joined, obviously, in a different way now from those who are still aspiring for this membership. And then we can say, for example, from the perspective of an EU official, the year 2013 was very successful. Croatia became an EU member. There are new candidates: Albania, Montenegro, Serbia. There is the Belgrade-Pristina process going on. On the other hand, what is happening with the rest of the region, and what is actually happening with the EU integration process? So if you would ask, for example, a group of free thinkers, as we did in the European Fund for the Balkans by establishing an initiative called the Balkans and Euro Policy Advisory Group, you would get a completely different answer, saying that there is a process which could be called the best business as usual, which is not producing the expected results. And if things continue like that, we cannot really expect that the EU accession process of these Western Balkans, which are still out of the EU, will be successful in a rational time period, so to say. It can take too long and produce not much. And by that, it cannot solve the more urgent issues in the region. Therefore, this group of people, coming from different areas, developed a report exploring the European future of the Balkans by presenting 4 possible scenarios for the EU integration process, calling the first one the business as usual, the second one the so-called Turkish scenario, referring to a never-ending accession process, like it's in the case of Turkey. And the third one we called, it was unpopular at that point, and now it becomes again very questionable, the Ukrainian scenario, referring to other powers which might gain interest in the region instead of the EU, and jeopardizing the EU integration process of the Balkans. And the fourth scenario, again, are not very well accepted, mainly the Big Bang scenario, advocating for a faster EU integration process of the region. Because, as this group described the situation in the Balkans today, if we would sum up very shortly how we could define the state of the art in all these countries, we could say that these are big states with dysfunctional institutions who need to deal with very serious and challenging political and economic transformation. And then there is the question whether the EU integration process as it is today can really help these countries to overcome these challenges. We are not sure that it is possible. I would like to refer to what Ivan Krastev said recently about the attractiveness of the EU today to the Balkan countries. It's very obvious, as he said, that the EU has lost its magic, but of course it's still kept its very importance. On the other hand, there are a few things which are simply questionable or which are not there anymore when it comes to the importance or the core of what the EU represents to those who want to join. First of all, the post-war narrative has been exhausted, and it's simply not there anymore. The new generations, both living in the EU but also in the region, do not refer to the post-war experience, the Second World War, and what the EU did for overcoming that period. Then the geopolitical rationale of the EU is quite different. There is no Soviet Union. Of course, there are now some new challenges for the EU. However, the EU now has a different relation to these challenges. So, on one hand, maybe for too long, peace was taken for granted. Today, it's not anymore, but again, it's another question. There is no more trust in prosperity. It's not granted either. The latest crisis showed that it is not so obvious in in which sense EU can provide answers for very difficult economical questions. And then the question of the state of democracy and the level of trust of people in democracy and in the institutions which represent the whole of the democratic systems in different countries. The feeling of powerlessness of citizens contribute to fading of democracy, the democratic model as we knew it. And then, of course, there is the question, at one point, the countries of Southeastern Europe started their democratic transitions, and which model they were trying to implement, and which club they were trying to join. So today, the region, the rest of the Western Balkans, if we concentrate on them, finds itself in a very demanding, very exhausting, very challenging process of integrating into a club which is itself in a very difficult situation. There is a double challenge for EU, crisis within the EU and crisis on its periphery. The EU found itself in a position where it owns, so to say, a crisis, when it needs to become a geopolitical player and where it needs to prove itself and find many answers. Weston Pusic said today that Southeastern Europe will have to deal with a much larger challenge than it may be expected. We are neighbors with regions which are representing huge challenges, and simply because of our geographical, so to say, position, we are in this situation. On the other hand, as we look at the region, it is still very much dealing with itself. It is still very much concentrating on domestic issues, and by being exhausted with such a complicated, bureaucratic, technical, on the other hand, very untransparent political process as the European integration process towards this region is today, it's questionable how we can really develop itself as a player in a broader sense. On the other hand, until the region does not find positive arguments for being a constructive player within the EU, it will be very difficult to sell the enlargement to the Balkans outside the Balkans. On the other hand, it's already very difficult to sell it within the Balkans. So I would like to invite now Reinventing Pusic, who is involved in the Balkans for so many years in capacities, and who I believe is still trying to push forward some of the core initiatives and ideas which should somehow re-energize the dynamics, both in the region, but also the approach from Brussels and for some of the member states to really succeeding with a positive process.
Thank you very much, Hedwig, for this nice introduction. I'm asking for your forgiveness that I want first of all to focus on the title of our event. I was a little bit shocked about the title, Reinventing the European Project. I think what we have to do is not to reinvent the European project, we have to reinvent the politics and the politicians who are leading in this direction. I think it was not realized, it has to be said quite straight, and that was been mentioned by fatigue and so on, is a general fatigue of the politicians of politics in Europe. and that's one of the reasons why it's not really moving forward. I think the crucial date was the downfall of the Iron Curtain in 1989. It's usual to mention it, but what did not happen afterwards, that we relearned Europe. Still, I'm running around in Europe delivering speeches, taking part in panel discussions and. May I say, my experience is that even the geographical knowledge about Europe is in limits. That the one part of Europe does not know how is the other part of Europe composed, what is situated where, and so on and so on. I think recently I mentioned in Brussels concerning Eastern Ukraine or new Russia. I think I was speaking here about the killings of the farmers by Joseph Stalin. I think in Brussels nobody knows it, that it was in this area. Huh? Leading personalities here. I think, so you can see there's not knowledge, it's even more primitive for the common citizen. For years I survived always in Vienna with the question, is Prague a city eastwards or westwards of Vienna? Huh? The general answer was eastwards, for sure, it was the east. It is more westwards. I think we are not really able to know the geography in which we understood. We have a second question. We have the problem with borders. I think one of the aims of the European Union project is to overcome borders. We have a tendency, we want more borders. The ministers of interior, some of them within the European Union, are always quite happy. We need, again, border control and so on and so on. They want to fight corruption, criminality and so on and so on. And they are not aware that you get a visa with money quite easier. The criminals are always getting visas. I think the border control in this context makes really no sense here. I think we have to do other, to overcome these problems of borders. And we have the problems of the borders which we have heritage. I think the heritage of borders you could see in minor questions here in Southeast Europe. The struggle between the Slovenes and the Croatians, for example. There are still some problems existing between the Croats and the Serbs, and so on and so on. But I think we have the heritage of the borders of the Soviet republics. The borders were done by a famous man, Joseph Vissarionovich Djougashvili, alias Stalin. He was a Georgian, but he made a lot of borders in favor of Russian minorities. Now we have the heritage of these Russian minorities here in, with the temptation, I think, by a nationalistic view, we have to protect our Russians. Or they were moved in, like in Latvia or in Estonia, or they were created as Transnistria, Moldova, and so on and so on. You can continue on this subject. I think that's one of the real problems. So I may say the first demand is we need a better knowledge of Europe. And that's a job which has to be done by the universities, by the teachers, and so on and so on. So I'm always in favor that we need a competence within the European Union on education. Not instead of the nation state, but in addition to the nation state. The knowledge is really in limits. I may say, I was in charge of entering Austria to the European Union. I had to go around in the member states of the European Union, 12 at this time. I will never forget, as I came to Spain and Portugal, the knowledge of Austria was in limits. We are always convinced that everybody knows for sure Austria, Mozart, Beethoven, and whatever, and Wiener Schnitzel, and so. It's not true. I think there's a lack of knowledge about our own continent. So far, the knowledge question is the first one. The second, European project. We are now always mentioning we need a new narrative about Europe. Or the sentence I like more was done by Jacques Delors. He was saying, you cannot love a common market. He was right, it's not sexy, it's necessary. But for love, I think it's not enough. No? We have to give Europe a soul. That means content. Interesting enough, beg your pardon, for the organizers of this conference, culture in our discussions was not even here mentioned. But what is really existing in Europe is a kind of common understanding of culture in the differences and bringing the differences together. What is really European now in Europe is culture for sure. It is creating a lot of connections. I think we are discussing quite a lot of other things, not too much culture. This is a part, I think, of the narrative. In connection with this, here I am critical, we have a certain arrogance of the West of Europe concerning the Eastern part. I think if you are mentioning Eastern, it is a deteriorated denomination. It's Eastern. That's not so important, not so valuable, it's not so much accepted, and so on and so on. The reason might be that we can define Europe easily in the north, by the Atlantic Sea, in the west also by the Atlantic Sea, in the south by the Mediterranean Sea. To define Europe in the east is more difficult. And by history, always from the east, the threats were coming. I think for the Huns and whatever you want, all the time of the migration of the peoples has really happened. And so far, I think we have a lot of difficulties for sure existing on this. The other difficulty is, in difference to the borders, the question of globalization. I think it was mentioned before at the panel, we have to say quite straight, we Europeans are 7% of the world population, we are still 18 to 20% of the economic power, and it is for sure going down. I think we are going, if we are not looking to ourselves, to marginalization of Europe. We have still a Eurocentric view in the things. I'm asking the ambassador of Great Britain for forgiveness, but I think Security Council was mirroring the power in 1945 in the composition. Today, for sure, Great Britain and France are in no European Union. The answer is they are not able to make decisions by the treaties and so on. That's for sure right. But I think it's not mirroring the fact that, for example, Brazil or India and so on and so on have quite a great importance. I think that's not a real way to look to the reality. And we are missing in a certain way the reality check about Europe. We are very Eurocentric, but this is not anymore the reality of the globalized world. And what is really happening, history also strikes back in a certain way. We are trying to do this here in Southeast Europe because history is a lot around, but it is also in another context. There was a remark, I think it was done by Vesna Pusic, that the Americans had no exact knowledge about Iraq. I think the problem started earlier, the colonial times. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office, I think, made the divisions together with the French of the Ottoman Empire. They had one really working instrument, the linear. I think there were straight lines, and we created entities which were not very compact. And we will focus the fact that it is more and more happening also in Africa because it was the same strategy. How to handle this, I think, will be a difficult question. The Middle East, I mentioned this for sure quite closer, and is playing, I think, a very important role. You have an opposite program. I think in a certain way in the background, the feeling for empires are coming back. Our nice friend Erdogan, I think, is still a little bit thinking of the Ottoman Empire. For the moment hindered by the wars within the Middle East, but in the background he is considering. Our friend Vladimir Putin is for sure thinking of the Soviet Empire, I think under his auspices, not on this of the Soviet Union. That's also coming back. It is the desire to go back a little bit and not really to go forward. And I think this plays a very important role. And we are lacking also a lot of fantasy. We are convinced we can stop a movement which is backed by religion in Islamic State with bombing. With bombing you can stop nothing. I think it will go for sure on, and it is really a battle on values and so on and so on. So far I want to mention, and it should be very important for this center here, we have to look also to the factor of religion. Not in the sense of to be religious, in the sense of how politics is using religion to fight for. And that's not only an Islamic problem, because immediately everybody is now saying, it's Islam. It's not only the Islam. If you are looking to some Orthodox churches here in the region, for example, to the Serbian church, I think the Serbian Orthodox Church is first Serbian, and then they might be Christian. I think we have these difficulties existing to a very large content, and I think it is extremely dangerous how it is going. And then the next impact on democracy, it was mentioned. I think we have a certain development of attractiveness of autocratic managers of the state. That's very much coming in. The question of democracy is raised quite right. It's very much necessary, and we have not the right discussion how to improve democracy. I think it was by a comment out of the audience that for the Center of Advanced Studies, we said we have to look to human rights. I think that's one of the main contributions which we have to do. I want to add another thing. We have to look to press freedom. I was joining some meetings in the region, for example in Romania and recently in Macedonia. I think press freedom. It's even worse than it has been as I started my job here in the region. I think first of all it was an old communist press institution, then the foreigners came in, Watz from Germany and Rijeka from Switzerland, Styria from Austria and so on and so on. And now they are overtaken by oligarchs or whatever, or even by governments and so on and so on. Press freedom is a part of democracy, a very important part, and it is not really existing. It is endangered, and I think it should be a subject of research quite urgently, what we can do done to improve. Because there's also the economic situation of the media, quite a bad one, and so for journalists are writing what the owners are wanting, because otherwise they are losing their job. And there are too many journalists and not enough jobs. That's one of the consequences for sure existing. It's not a consolation if I may tell you, it's not only here in Southeast Europe, it's also in other parts of Europe going quite in the same direction, and that's not in favor of the quality of the newspapers. I think another remark should be done on international organizations. I think for the moment the international organizations are not worthwhile the paper on which they are written. Look to the Council of Europe. Here we have Russia and Ukraine as a member. Did you hear anything of the Council of Europe concerning the last conflicts? What was done here on bargaining and so on and so on? Zero. The only one organization, thanks to our Swiss friends, may I say, was OECD, because they were able to create some surveillance of what is happening there and some postings. So far, I think we have to discuss it, how can it be done in a better way. Please don't misunderstand me. I don't want to liquidate the international. So the other side, I think we are a precondition that we are able to come together and to compromise and to get common solutions here in this context. Coming to the region, and Hedwig said a lot of right things. I think we have to do more in the region on the open problems. I think you have even crazy things. I'm traveling the region. I'm always looking, being on a Slovenian highway. It is ending a lot of kilometers before Croatia. I think to make more difficulties for tourists, the Slovenian government said to me. This is neighborhood. Friendly neighborhood existing. I think there must be a tough discussion on this behavior. But it's not the only example. I don't want to blame the Slovenians only. I think there's the difficulties between Macedonia and Greece. I think it's a real nonsense. And here I'm blaming the member states of the European Union not have put more pressure on the Greeks to come to a solution. I think first of all the Greeks said we are so strong, we have invented Europe so far. I think we are the right. Now we are weak, we cannot do this, that we are getting a solution where we have to compromise. The Macedonians are doing also evil things. They are creating identities by monuments, which I think is for sure also not the right way to proceed on this subject. I think here you can see these are questions which are embedded in the region, and where the region has to move from this thing to raise the right question. I think I'm not yet finished concerning this question. I'm involved in the Danube Regional Initiative. Long title is European Union Strategy on the Danube Region, EUSDR. I think I'm in charge for getting an arrangement between Romania and Bulgaria on the Danube. Why? The Danube is for 470 kilometers. 470 kilometers. It's a distance from here to Vienna. Only one bridge was in the past. Only one bridge for 470 kilometers. Recently we got the second one, but we didn't get connection roads to the bridge. So far, I think what is the sense of the bridge? Yeah? The reason is that the bridge was paid by the European Union, the connection roads have to be paid by the national governments. That's for sure. The connection roads will come. I want to be optimistic. But I think 2 bridges are also not enough for 470 kilometers. To overbridge. As I started my discussions here, I was asking the Romanians, I think, why are you moving forward? I get a very nice answer. You have to know that Danube is still the border to the Ottoman Empire. Set in the year 2013, last year, still the border to the Ottoman Empire. Where do we have the borders? Here, even in the heart, and so on and so on. I think this we have to overcome and have to be quite pushy. Let's look to the active side. The Visegrad countries, this is now Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary, even with all the difficulties they have internally, I think created the Visegrad funds. It's a kind of a cooperation. I think I know a lot of necessities here in the region, including the European Fund of the Balkans. I think we will come to a point where we are not anymore able to get money from outside. I think to look in the brave eyes of the Norwegians, do you pay for us? Because Norway is quite close to the Balkans. I think we have to ask the Balkan states to pay for themselves. I think to raise money out of this because the economy is improving. It's not on the high level we wish all, but I think there must be also created a responsibility for cooperation, for cross-border cooperation. And that will be a very interesting sign in this context. And the last point, I've mentioned it a little bit with the religion. I think what we need is a discussion about European values, quite broad, because nobody else beside us will do it. And for sure, we need it. So far, I think there's a lot of things to do, because Vesna Pusic outlined very well what we have to do on behalf of the Center of Advanced Studies. I think those who are involved here, you will not lose the right subjects which you have to do research and to promote. I think you are fully employed for the next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Busek. Now we move to Haki Abazi, who is coming from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. He is program director at the Fund for the Western Balkans, and he listed a number of issues.
That's going to change.
That's going to change.
Yeah.
Okay.
After 2 days.
After 2 days, okay, you modified your presentation. Well, I'm curious whether you are going to further develop some of the issues which were mentioned, or maybe you even have some more to add to these already very challenging topics.
Let's try this first. Okay, I guess we're capable of making the microphone work. So I guess it's not very unusual to say that it's hard to find refreshing topics after 2 days of going back and through in this. But you who might not know me, you will get the chance to know me today. I tend not to shy away because in addition of being the director for the Western Balkans of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which is a US-based foundation, I am from Kosovo, so my stakes in the region are personal as well as professional. And I want to start by saying, and not miss the opportunity to say to the center that it's a great initiative. I think if we have heard anything in the last 2 days, it's endless list of things to study and research and produce. Of course, we all differ on the approaches and the way should it start really focused and then expand, or start expanded and then focus. Those are issues to be decided on the technicalities and probably what we call the comparative advantages that the center has in its niche comparing to what exists out there in the academic field. But my own advice, working a little bit in my portfolio with the universities, mostly in the United States, is that please try to embed and incorporate one philosophy. Do not create another bubble. Academic world in the former Yugoslavia was a bubble that produced nationalism, nurtured nationalism, and supported nationalism that exploded with the war. The whole energy of 50 years of former Yugoslavia that was accumulated exploded with the ideas of extermination of the others. So the idea of today and last 2 days hearing that diversity is the biggest richness of the Balkans, it's a great notion and theory, but in practice, it's different. Diversity still continues to be utilized by politicians and even civil society at some point as a way to divide people and a way to keep them apart. You saw what happened in the stadium in Belgrade just a few days ago. Everything in 15 years that has been built was able to bring about down all the relationship in 1 minute. And it's cynical that even intellectuals, professors, and people in the government have, on the fear of losing votes, have followed the same narrative. Don't do it because we are better than them. Instead of saying this is the moment to actually exclude this 1% of crazy, nationalistic, fascist people that each nation has. Germans have it, Swedish has it, Norwegians, everybody has 1%. The question is, what does 99% do when they come up in the front pages of the media, when they come up in the using the public space to portray the image of the nations? And I think we cannot shy away of engaging within the region on what actually diversity presents to us. Mostly at the academic level, I think the reason why we don't do it, and in a way, or they don't do it, embrace it kind of lightly within the closed rooms when there are no media present, is because they are worried that they are selling out to the others, which just 10 years ago were defined as enemies. But to go back to how do we see the region, I think we cannot excuse international community. I hear to Dr. Busek saying that you have to do it yourself, and it's true. But that you, it's undefined too. You is 90% of people disempowered, left out from the processes, and 10% that have been empowered by the European Union, by Americans, by international community as leaders of this region. And they, in a way, get recycled elections after elections because they are an extension of the interest of international community. And here where I come to what I think has not been touched as a subject in this last 2 days, and I would like to, for the center to take it very seriously, is the political economy of the region, which connects with the political economy of European Union, and then extrapolates with the political economy of the European Union also in the Middle East and the neighboring country, including Ukraine. I have lived 3 years in Afghanistan and worked in Pakistan. I have been into Syria after the conflict. I have been spending time in Turkey. The idea that we talk about politics, we talk about diplomacy, we talk about civil society, but we do not talk the way we do business, it's a huge problem. Because I heard when one of the guys raised the issue of corruption and criminality in the Balkans, there were few people in the room that immediately said, that's everywhere. Corruption, it's everywhere. The fact that it is everywhere, it's true, but the problem is what it does to the political system and the political economy in the region. Why do we continue to have such a strong criminal networks in the Balkans 15 years after the war? It's because those people, and the sequencing in my analysis go like this. The war broke up in Yugoslavia. There were people who profited from the war industry in that period of 10 years. Smuggling, selling ammunition, people, cigarettes, everything. That money got into the privatization process of publicly and socially owned enterprises of the so-called communist system. They were the only ones with money. So they were able to buy most of the socially publicly owned properties. And then thirdly, the third phase, which is happening now, that money is being invested in partnership with the big corporate world from European Union, Americans, and developed countries into what is called economy here. The question is it free market economy? No. It's a centralized, controlled economy by organized crime in the Balkans. That's why we are going back, ending up, that money, this funding, ending up in the political parties that don't want to reform themselves, and they over and over again produce the same leaders that are interested in nothing but status quo. Unfortunately, those leaders are accepted and applauded by the European Union itself as well. And this is a big problem. We cannot watch Vučić narrowing down the space of media in Serbia and still believe that this is okay. Because we saw what Koštunica did, we saw how silent Tadić was in reforms, and now we see the clear signals of narrowing down the space for civil society and media, and we're not saying anything. We cannot come out the night after elections that were qualified as an industrial rigging votes in Kosovo and call that the votes were democratic because Kosovo immediately need a government to get into a dialogue with Serbia. This was 2010. 90% of people in Kosovo knew that the elections were rigged and the votes were stolen. European Union from Brussels sent a message saying it's okay. This is Kosovo. The rule of law in Kosovo can be seen differently. No, because that's a compromise with the fundamental standards of the European Union, and people have reasons to lose trust on how EU treats the political class in the Balkans. We just saw the other day what happened to the mayor of Zagreb. It's too late for us. Imagine what Kosovars and Serbs and Macedonians are thinking. You can get into European Union and actually have massive organized criminal network in the country. It's a big question, right? On how actually EU is treating. But let me list in my mind what are the major problems here in the Balkans, and then I'll answer. I would start with Bosnia-Herzegovina and the fact that EU does not dare to implement its own decision on the constitutional discrimination of the minorities to be elected for the public office. It's an embarrassing act. That Bosnia to this date does not have the implemented decision from the International European Court for Human Rights, right? And then nobody wants to push for Bosnia to move from what we know. It's an accumulating frustration for every single people in there, Serbs and Bosniaks and Croats. But it's locked within the interest of three leadership that are utilizing the Dayton Agreement. If it's going to be left to the free fall, I believe that Bosnia can end up in another huge problem. And it seems like EU wants Bosnia to go on a free fall because there is no serious engagement of the EU to solve and deal with the Bosnia problem. The second one is Kosovo and Serbia. Imagine if one of the Albanian players was killed in the stadium in Belgrade. What would happen? To same surprise in 1991 when nobody believed that war could happen, it could have happened then. And we would be all surprised. Because Albanians from Kosovo, I'm sure, will try to revenge against Serbs in Kosovo, and then Serbs will try to revenge against Albanians in the South Serbia in Preševo Valley. So suddenly we wake up with a conflict in our hands. Why? Because since for almost 4 years nobody wants to admit that our European Union has engaged Serbia and Kosovo in an artificial dialogue with no base on the engagement and interest of the general public. It's nice to see Prime Minister of Serbia and Kosovo shaking hands, but the problems are not solved by the photo opportunities. Problems are solved with the concrete measures that happen on the ground. And the reason why I say it's an artificial, because it's locking actually Serbia and Kosovo in another 20 to 30 year problem by signing the agreements that are not implementable and are not on the perspective of development of neither Serbia or Kosovo. Serbia should have never been conditioned with the dialogue in order to enter the EU. Serbia deserves to go to EU with or without entering into dialogue with Kosovo. The relationship between Serbia and Kosovo should be treated on the good neighboring European Union conventions, not on some artificial new agreements that are made outside of complete framework of the European Union values. Think what is happening with the travel between Serbia and Kosovo today. It's much more expensive and much more limited. Think about recognition of diplomas of young Albanians from Serbia studying in Pristina University. They are not accepted, and the Constitutional Court of Serbia dismisses the decision on the agreement that was signed in Brussels. Think about how the energy sector, which is vital for the region, is going to work with an obscure energy agreement between Serbia and Kosovo. All this reminds me agreements between Palestine and Israel that every 10 years produce tensions, and when they start negotiating or talking, they start from another 0-point level. I am warning because I can see where the situation is going. We're locked in a non-development vision in Kosovo and Serbia case. Macedonia is the third, and I think it goes beyond them trying to create identity through the statutes. I think Macedonian leadership is considering the prolongation of any progress by putting the real problems under the carpet. Not dealing with the Ohrid agreement, not dealing with a real participatory approach to creating institutions, and continuing what I said in the beginning, for leadership to profit from a direct link with the organized crime. It is embarrassing for us as civil society, as academia, as political neutral people, but including international community, that 15 years on, you see the visible hand of organized crime having an influence over the political leadership and the relationship in between the region. I am convinced there are no crazy Albanians, no crazy Serbs or Macedonians that wake up every day hating each other. But I'm convinced that there is a perfect collaboration of organized crime in the region that goes across the boundaries of ethnic, religious belonging, and they speak only one language, and that's money, and that's what directs the region toward being kept apart and not functioning together.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the domestic gatekeeper elites, which in a way get support from the international community, well, and
get recognition.
Recognition, yes, get recognition. On the other hand, also support by designing the process, I would say the integration process in a way which prefers the status quo, as you mentioned as well. So I think that we already heard very unexpected statements. I would underline these two, adding what Mr. Pusek was emphasizing, that is the role of the countries of the region to focus on issues which are in their hands, because of course, obviously, there are many problems which the countries of the region, the governments of the region cannot solve without the assistance of the international community. It's obvious that the EU integration process cannot be the cure for everything. It has been designed for these countries in a different way than it was for the Central and Eastern European countries. The last, the 2004 large expansion of Europe to the Central and Eastern European countries was a lot different. The process was a lot different than it is now for the Balkans, having in mind exactly these security reconsiderations and the peace building process which need to be, and the democratization process which is very special again as for a post-war region in the Balkans. So all this brings us to the consequences which have been listed so far, but I again think that all this also tells us that now we need to rethink again how the EU integration process should be designed in order to really help these countries to reform and to get closer to a status which complies with the requirements of the EU. As someone said from our group, I think it was Dejan Jovic, who is participating in the Balkans Zero Policy, these countries will never become Finland. So the EU should give up by expecting this from the Balkan countries. On the other hand, there should be a kind of profile designed, what these countries should really achieve in order to be able to join a club where they should perform and where they should find their place and role as equal partners to the rest of EU member states. I'm very happy that we have 5 more persons sitting around these tables who can add, I believe, some very interesting thoughts. Some of them I know personally, some others I just met today, with some I'm connected via LinkedIn, but we never met in person, so it was today again a great opportunity. First, I would like to hear what Senada Šabić can tell us in some 5 minutes.
Thank you, Henry. Of course, it's a challenge to say everything in a short time. Driving to Rijeka this morning, I was thinking what would be my valuable contribution, and in my modest thoughts, I thought that the best would be to really identify a problem that I see here nationally, and I think it's also applicable to the region, which is connected to European issues, but addresses first and foremost our own national concerns, and in the context, obviously, of the scope and the framework of the research that is to take place in this center here. And I think, adding to the long list that you mentioned of ideas that circulated here in these 2 days, is the topic of the study of migration. I think Croatia lacks this serious study of what migration is. It is not a political issue. It's not part of public debate. It has been, Croatia has been traditionally a country of emigration, as many of the countries in the region are. It has not become yet a country of immigration, and it doesn't even foresee such scenario, although it could be likely. Just to share, and I remembered when I was driving this morning, this may, probably for some strange lunar influence, I took time and read programs of all 25 party lists and coalition lists for the European parliamentary elections in Croatia. And none of them, not a single one of them, had any reference to migration. None. And then I took time and I read P and SD and ALDE and others, and obviously they all had reference to migration. So it seemed that Croatian members of the European Parliament will take part in discussions or will be exposed to discussions in the European Parliament on issues of migration with no national debate, no national position, nothing. Another reason why I think this is important is also linked partially to culture or history or this concept of border that Mr. Busek mentioned. Because we are so much inclined to thinking that we are at the forefront of some defense wall against these forces from the east or south. This concept of ante murale Christianitatis, that is so easily evoked here. And then if you have European member states administering externally, partially, borders of the European Union, for a number of years, if there is no enlargement and no effective cooperation among neighboring countries, then the expectation that there will be mobility of people through these borders, it is easily to imagine that this concept gaining more prevalence or stronger image of Croatia being again a borderland against the others, which we want to overcome through the cooperation and the mobility of people. So this duality of mobility and freedom of movement and Fortress Europe and protecting Schengen and Balkan routes and stopping the Balkan route of criminality and smuggling, it's important to analyze in order at least to take away the possibility to uninformed debate. And my fear is that if we don't start thinking and researching and discussing these things more, with more arguments, we will end up, in some other countries, surprised by circumstances and then buying easily into some populist debate which shouldn't take place. And the research on migration that I envisage in this center should take into account also demography, declining demographic trends that we are seeing, declining economy, and the relevance or the importance of the link between migration and economy, and the fact that we are also losing bright, educated, young urban people constantly, and we will probably continue to do so. So what do we do about it? Well, I'm really making it in 5 minutes. Just the last remark. I think as much as this sort of research would be important for Croatia and also for Western Balkans or Southeastern Europe, this part of the world, these all issues are similar in all of these countries. I think it is also very important for the European Union or European debate that we have on migration. And if we can imagine this sort of debate or research taking place in this center, then maybe Croatian disadvantage could become also advantage, because it is almost virgin in the debate of migration. So it doesn't have any impact, or it doesn't carry the burden already. It comes clean on the issue. So we can also be a hub on migration discussion, as I envisage it, and relevant for broader European context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was at Dubrovnik, in Dubrovnik, in the Croatian Forum, there was a panel which was chaired by Ivan Vejvoda, and there were between 25 and 30 panelists, I think. Today someone mentioned, well, it would be a challenge with a panel of such size, and I said, well, I'm not Ivan Vejvoda, so therefore I will handle 7, 8 people. But what I would like to say is actually it's so easy when you have people cooperating with you who are really sticking to the time, what was foreseen by the organizers who designed this exercise. So thank you very much again. I would like to invite now Ms. Elvio Accarini. With Senada, we got a new angle to this discussion. So please tell us how you see these big topics, how they could send a message from this conference to some further discussions in Europe, on the region, and on the state of democracy.
I'll try, thank you. Does everybody hear me? Oops. So does everybody hear me? No problem. Okay, great. So I try to put in some order some of my thoughts on one of the concepts that were announced in the brief descriptions of the papers of distinguished speakers that spoke before me. But then things changed in their talks, but I was not able to be so flexible to change, so I will comment on this concept that was announced, and it's a participatory democracy. And then this list of thoughts that I offer to you with some thoughts on sovereignty of states in the European community. So first I must say I'm a big fan of participatory democracy, because I'm a big fan of great philosopher John Stuart Mill, but I'm a big fan of participatory democracy, the ideal theory. At the same time, I'm a big fan of another big English philosopher, is Bernard Williams, who recommends us always to see where we are and to see what is the best we can do, starting from where we are. And taking this standpoint, I think there are big problems with participatory democracy. That in the real world where we live, it risks to be the rule of ignorance, the rule of client politics and economics. And in Italian and in Croatian we have both my languages. We have two words, clientelismo and clientelism. So I think that it's a danger of participatory democracy. Further problem, the rule of prejudices. We see the recent events in Croatia, for example, the biggest national mobilizations were around referendum for restriction of rights. One for restriction of the equal recognition of homosexuals, and the other one for the restriction of the use of minority language and alphabets. The Cyrillic alphabet, yes. And yeah, so what can be the reaction to such problem? Well, there are some utopian suggestions. For example, there are some really serious and distinguished professors from the Euro Center of the University of Oxford who speak about moral and civic enhancement. So they think it's possible to use medicine who would improve some of our neurotransmitters and would make us be better citizens. So neurotransmitters like serotonin and oxytocin. I think the same as you do, but helpfully it's my profession, so it's a good occasion to write papers on these thought experiments. And, yeah. Well, so what are the alternatives? First, let's see what's the actual situation. Unfortunately, I must agree with all the pessimistic things that were said in this panel. And I would use an expression, partitocracy, and political parties really detached from the interests of the population. And also by restricting not only the decisions, but also the subjects on the political agenda. So, equality, for example. It's impressive how this concept is out of the political agenda. And I'm taking statistics of the diplomatic representatives that sometimes come out to visit, not today, but presenting their nations. And they give various indexes of merits of the index of production, development, and so on. I never heard any single representative diplomatic speaking about the index of equality in the country from where this diplomatic representative spoke. Maybe I didn't hear sufficient number of them, but any thoughts of criticism to the diplomatic representatives, but to the politics inside of the country. So it seems to me it's a global problem that equality is out of the political agenda. So what's the possible institutional attempt to a piece of solution to this? Well, I would suggest a more, representative of the idea of expertise democracy, a stronger engagement of experts. So, for example, something that is not in the tradition of our country and even not in the tradition of, I would say, in the whole region, but to organize boards of experts with a relevant role. Which kind of role? First, consulting role, so giving comments. Second, giving public reviews of law proposals, the level of law. Third, this would be particularly ambitious, even referendum now is a very, how to say, fashionable word in Croatia. So perhaps even the power to start referendum when they judge that a law or law proposal is not good. How to form these expert boards? I would suggest even to make them international. So to choose the boards not only inside the country, but also to have experts from foreigner countries, selected, for example, by institutions like the European Science Foundation, or maybe even better, a board of the best-ranked university in Europe or in the world. So, two questions at the end, I think, in 5 minutes. First question, is this an improvement of democracy? Well, I'm not sure, obviously it has some elitist elements, but I think that it might be, obviously this might be elaborated, but I think it might be a first step toward improvement of democracy, even in the direction of the form that I would appreciate very much to see in practice, and it's participatory democracy. Second question, is this a reduction of sovereignty of the states? And the answer is obviously yes, it is. But in the dilemma between sovereignty of nations, states on one side, and improvement of welfare, equality and human rights and freedoms on the other side, I'm on the other side.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nikola Petkovic already had a very interesting intervention today, so I am sure that he saved some comments or some thoughts for this part of the conference as well. What could add to the list of ideas which we would send from this conference to further elaboration.
Is it on? No. No, it's on. But thank you very much. There were really two very, very substantially good talks, and I decided to refrain from my talk I had in mind before to actually respond to some of your ideas. But I will start with a quote, and when I go over 5 minutes, please do kick me out. The actual moment contains a crucial question. Will Europe keep its absolute superiority in all fields? Will Europe become what it really is, a small cape of the Asian continent? Or will Europe continue to be what it seems to be, a precious pearl of our earthly universe, the pearl of our sphere, the brain of a spacious body? It's quoted by Paul Valéry, so it's fairly old, seems to be fairly new and recent. As for the region, we kind of refrain to talk about the Balkans. There is something condemning about the Balkans. Western Balkans seems to be a little bit better because it's Western, not because it's Balkans. So if Europe is the Cape of Asia, the Balkans is the Cape of Europe, the edge of the edge, the double margin. When we talk about the region, sometimes, and I also did engage in that discussion about 10, 15 years ago, we argued for the existence of Central Europe, for instance, as opposed to both. Claudio Magris, a famous Italian intellectual and writer, says that he sees Central Europe to be a metaphor of protest against capitalism and the economy of the West, and this kind of imperial neo-Putinism which we see now from the East. This is, and also when we talk about the region, and His Excellency Hofstad said, we always have to look in the past. Yes, but we live in a very peculiar part of the world where we really are on a daily basis convinced that the key to our future is in our past. And if the key to our future is in our deep medieval past, then, we don't need to do anything anymore. We've already been there. So, I'm not against the past, but I'm against, for instance, Tudjman's idea that in 1990, we finally realized our 1,000-year-old dream of independence, as if there is a continuity in time. As if, the Croatian king Tomislav in the 10th century hung out with Croatian peasants. No. He was killing them. He was hanging out with tycoons of his time, which are kings and princes of the other countries. Okay, communication between the academe, society, and politicians, again, that needs to be established, absolutely. But, for instance, they do not want to listen to us. Who will lend us a voice? When President Josipovic was in Rijeka trying to become the president, I deeply admired President Josipovic. We had a meeting. He said that he would form a think tank of independent intellectuals. He would come here once a month for a meeting. He never came. When Željko Jovanović was the Minister of Science and Education, he promised the same thing, and we were stupid enough to offer our services to him, volunteering, for no money, he never asked a single opinion from us. So I agree with you, but who will lend me the voice? And I don't want to enter the active sphere of politics because the official politics is very corrupt space in my country. So it's a very interesting, there were about the press, which you mentioned. There is this huge, I'm just coming back from Canada, and I'm terribly jet lagged, so forgive me. There is a debate in the US about who was right, Aldous Huxley or George Orwell. Huxley in his Brave New World says, we will be allowed to say everything, but nobody will listen to us anymore. And Orwell was in favor of absolute surveillance. They were absolutely both right. It actually happens. What we were allowed, and we are allowed, to say whatever we want in public press. But what happened recently, in the newspaper where I have a column here in Novi East, a person was threatened to fire because she wrote an article, to get fired, because she wrote an article against plastic bags. She was in favor of recycling. And the guy who was the owner of the newspaper, a product of his firm was plastic bags. So that's the new form of censorship we are witnessing. And in the end, when I mentioned corruption, people laughed at me. Corruption is everywhere. Ebola is everywhere. Does it mean that we're not going to fight it? Flu is everywhere. Who will not get a flu shot? There is a difference between corruption in this region. I totally agree with you, because Watergate affair was solved. Exxon affair was solved. Milan Bandic, who is today in prison, he was arrested for drunk driving, apologized, resigned, and then came back to power stronger than ever. Happier, more optimistic people, more optimistic citizens today, they say, okay, the question I had was not what happened, what did Bandic do, but why now? Why is he in prison now? Why was not he there 5 years ago? The answer is, well, because Bajic was there in charge of doing it and he was corrupt. Now there is a new guy and he's doing his job. I'm afraid Bandic will walk out and not in the game of happen. So I'm not trying to condemn the region, I'm just trying to say that we need to rethink, not fatigue, and these are my last words. What we are facing here is, it's a sense of anomaly. For 20-some years, old values have gone. I'm not saying they were right. I'm talking about Yugoslavian values imposed on us. But in 20-some years, we were not allowed, we were not able to build a new set of positive values in order to continue. We still talk and live the experience of our last war as if it happened yesterday. It's still not over in our heads. Why? Because borders are here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let us now hear what the politician has to say. The official politician, who announced that he can be very passionate about these issues and he can talk for ages. I promise, use your 5 minutes, and if there are no questions afterwards at the discussion time, you can get another round.
Thank you. No, I'll try. I'll do my best, and I'll be within 5 minutes. I would just have a suggestion for the University of Rijeka. I guess 2 conferences are getting shape here, creating a shape of 2 conferences. One should be most likely the enlargement process, Western Balkans, and the changes in the criteria for enlargement. The second one should be future of European Union. I believe that today we talked about changing Europe in ever-changing world. In that case, that's the debate on the future of European Union, because those changes are happening. Remember how Europe started. European Union started as a peace project dealing with coal and steel. It became political and economical union. Then, in my personal opinion, now please, this is my personal opinion, it became economical and political union, so those terms switched places. And in some cases, it only became economical union. That's why Ukraine actually surprised many of the European politicians. Because my colleagues Many of them told me that nobody in 2014 expected this could happen. They forgot also the history of Europe. Now, yeah, that is the key question here. They forgot how Europe started. They forgot the peace project, and they became very, very eased with just this economy of Europe. Single market in Europe is not just a single market. I believe that this was well said. People forgot to talk about also the culture. For many of European countries, Europe is just a single market, and the phrase united in diversity actually never came to life. And this crisis even stopped from coming into life. And in many minds, Europe is just still a very huge single market. And we should debate also on that. Now, let me tell you about my work. I'm a parliamentarian, I chair the European Affairs Committee, and as we entered the European Union, somebody just simply dropped us into the sea. Okay, we had years of preparation, but we immediately got into the decision-making process, the lobbying, the formal decision-making process between the institutions. We immediately got in the middle of creating alliances between European countries. For each and every document, you create a different alliance. And sometimes a comma in a directive can mean millions for you or for somebody else. Because, unfortunately, when Europe talks about competitiveness, they talk about competitiveness between the EU member states, still between the EU member states. And we immediately got in the middle of EU democratic deficit, institutional deficit also, which is not debated, but there. And that's why we had the British initiative for changes in Europe, the Dutch initiative for changes in Europe, the Danish initiative with more Europe or less Europe. And then when we talk about the change in Europe, in the end, even if we stand and say, okay, maybe we should not have a formal debate, then you have, for example, the Juncker's Commission and his working program, which is a huge change in comparison to, let's say, now in hyphens, boring Barroso's commissions. If you read the document that Juncker's put forward, you will see that he's pushing forward in some directions. Perhaps the British won't like his federational tensions, thoughts, but this is where we got dropped in. In the last 2 weeks' time, and I will try to finish with this, the topic for European affairs in Croatian Parliament was circular economy, green jobs, TTIP, that is a hot topic in Europe but not in Croatia, and of course the European Council in the next couple of days because of the new framework for climate changes. And when I shut down my European part of the brain and open up regional newspapers and regional portals, it's like going through portal in time. And this is now the key question. This country entered the European Union. How much did Europe enter the minds or hearts of the people here? I sometimes get the feeling that 5 politicians entered the European Union, 10 mayors and heads of the counties, 200 people for the public services, 5 university professors, 10 scientists, and that's about it. And of course, a huge percentage of business sector, which is actually faster than the politicians. When we mentioned the Danube strategy is failing in everything but in business sector, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, the Croatians haven't taken part, you are right.
And now this is the question, that is now the question of Europe. And when it comes to the corruption in the region, Europe is not the one tolerating it. Europe in the end will be the slow death of that, because through the pressure that came, positive pressure that came from the European Union, those bonds, which are not just from the war, those people can be traced in the 70s or 80s. Those people are actually the ones ruling this region for 40 years now. Those bonds are breaking, but too slow, really too slow. The way to change it, restart, is actually also through education. Through education. And I am personally sad to see, but this project in Rijeka is one of the best in Croatia. One of the best. And I'm sad because we only have 5 like this. We should have 20, 30, 40, but we have 5. So This is my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now it will become obvious that I'm not a professional moderator, as I missed to ask Mr. Svein Marsland to tell me how he pronounces his name correctly, so I apologize if it was bad. Please take your 5 minutes.
Thank you. Before I comment today's speakers, I would like to express say that I'm very impressed by the University of Rijeka, how you prepare with energy and enthusiasm this new European study. I will come back to it, but let's go to the topic, the notion of Europe. Discussing the notion of Europe, there is both a synchronic and a diachronic aspect. The synchronic aspect, of course, is what is Europe, the geographic extension, and since I devoted my... Is it okay now? Okay. So the geographic extension of the notion of Europe has been discussed, and of course, since I devoted my life to spreading knowledge about Southeastern Europe, I think it's very important to include that part in the notion of Europe. And I can only repeat what Mr. Marušić said. Europe is not complete without the Western Balkans. Or Western Pusic, who stressed, citing the growing role of the lower right-hand corner of Europe. I like that expression. I think we had a very good survey of the problems in the Western Balkans, if we can use that expression of the Croatia's membership, by Aki Abasi. It was very pessimistic, but I think it was really necessary for us, and it will be necessary for everybody in EU working with the Western Balkans to get that knowledge. I am very concerned also about the situation, especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Macedonia. It seems to me that EU has given up these countries, especially Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is very dangerous, because not only is EU important for these countries, but these countries are also important for EU. Of course, corruption is a great problem, and especially that type of corruption which implies politicians, political parties, and the legal system, which has not been mentioned, but I think that is in every society the basic to have a non-corrupt, functioning legal system. And I must say that I am impressed by a country whose former prime minister is in prison, whose mayor of the capital is in prison. That is very exceptional in this region, and I think it's
Promising.
It is promising, and the other countries in the region could learn something from this country in that Italy, for example. Italy, for example. Well, a few words about the diachronic aspect of the notion of Europe. In the presentation yesterday about this study program, history was mentioned 2 times. Once it was from the establishment of EU, the other time from 1945. I just mentioned that there is a course at the University of Oslo called Europe and EU, and it presents, I thought, an historical approach to the notion of Europe based on history of ideas from antiquity until today. I don't say that you should start with the Greeks and Romans, but it is possible. Yesterday in the presentation of Rijeka, many assets were mentioned that might be attractive to students. However, I mean, architecture, the harbor, beaches, and so on. However, one aspect was not mentioned, namely the unique history of Rijeka. Rijeka has a turbulent past. In the 20th century, the town belonged to at least 5 different states, if I'm not wrong. It was even an independent state for a short time. For some time, the town was divided by an international border. And Rijeka is close to Istria, a very specific European region. And this specific history is an excellent background for European studies. I think you should take that as a point of departure. Use Rijeka and Istria as an example, as a micro-region, very relevant to the European studies, the study of history and European identity. So if the University of Rijeka take advantage of this regional specific history and culture, I'm sure that this study will be very attractive both for students from West and the Balkans. And Rijeka has a unique possibility to be a bridge between the Balkans and Western Europe, not least due to the well-known openness of Rijeka. So, once more, I wish you all the best for your efforts to create an exciting and attractive study. Thank you.